My name is Sophia, and I grew up in a quiet stone house on the edge of a small town in Europe. From the outside, it looked like a peaceful place. The walls were covered in light gray bricks, and there was a narrow garden with a few tired flowers that my mother, Elena, tried to keep alive. The wooden gate always made a soft creaking sound when it opened, like it was tired of being used. People passing by would smile at our house, thinking it held a happy family. But they never stepped inside. If they had, they would have seen how different things really were. Inside that house, everything had its place, including us. My father, Daniel, sat at the head of the table every night like a judge, and my brother, Adrian, sat close to him like he belonged there. I sat across from them, quiet, careful, always watching what I said. From as early as I can remember, Adrian was treated differently. He didn't have to try hard. He didn't have to prove himself. If he forgot his homework or got into trouble at school, my parents would laugh it off and say, "He's just being a boy." But if I made even a small mistake, the room would grow cold, and my father's voice would turn sharp, reminding me that I needed to do better. Adrian was what they called special. He got the bigger room, the better clothes, and all the attention. On his 18th birthday, my parents surprised him with a shiny black car that cost around $25,000. I remember standing by the window, watching him run his hands over it, smiling like the world had been handed to him. A few months later, on my birthday, I received a simple watch that couldn't have cost more than $50. My mother hugged me and said, "We know you understand." And I did understand, just not in the way they expected. I learned early that nothing would come easily to me. If I wanted something, I had to work for it. If I wanted to be heard, I had to speak louder than my fear. But most of the time, I chose silence. It was easier that way. I spent my evenings in my small room, studying, reading, and dreaming about a life beyond those gray walls. A life where I wasn't compared, judged, or overlooked. Adrian, on the other hand, lived without worry. He spent money freely, laughed loudly, and never once seemed to question his place in the world. My parents supported him in everything, paying for his needs without hesitation. Meanwhile, I took small jobs wherever I could, saving every dollar I earned. I didn't complain. I didn't ask for help. Somewhere deep inside, I had already accepted a simple truth. If I wanted a different life, I would have to build it myself. And slowly, quietly, that thought began to grow into something stronger, a plan, a promise, and maybe even a way out. I left that house in Europe on a cold morning that felt heavier than it should have. I had one suitcase, a worn backpack, and a ticket to America that cost me almost everything I had, about $1,200. I didn't tell many people I was leaving. My mother, Elena, gave me a quiet hug the night before, the kind that felt more like habit than emotion. My father, Daniel, simply nodded and told me to be practical. Adrian barely looked up from his phone. In that moment, I realized something clearly. I wasn't leaving anything behind that would miss me. The flight felt long, not just because of the hours, but because of the weight in my chest. I kept thinking about the life I was walking away from and the one I was stepping into, unknown, uncertain, and entirely mine. When I landed in America, everything felt louder, faster, and bigger. The city I moved to didn't wait for anyone. It didn't care where you came from or what you had been through. And strangely, I liked that. My new home was a tiny apartment in a crowded part of the city. It cost $900 a month, which felt almost impossible to manage at first. The walls were thin, the windows barely kept out the noise, and the kitchen was so small I had to turn sideways to move around. But it was mine. No one judged me there. No one compared me to Adrian. For the first time in my life, I had space, not just physically, but mentally. The first few months were the hardest I had ever lived through. I found a daytime job answering emails for a small company. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady. At night, I worked in a cafe, standing for hours, serving coffee and cleaning tables. Some nights I was so tired that I forgot what day it was. I ate simple meals, saved every dollar, and avoided anything that felt like a luxury. Even a $5 treat felt like too much. There were moments when I questioned everything. I would sit on the edge of my bed, staring at my laptop, wondering if I had made a mistake. Back in Europe, life may not have been fair, but it was stable. Here, I was on my own, and every decision mattered. But every time doubt came in, something stronger pushed it away. The memory of that house, that table, and the feeling of never being enough. That's when the idea started to take shape. It wasn't anything grand at first. Just a small thought that came to me during my office job. I noticed how people struggled to keep their work organized. Emails were lost, tasks were forgotten, and everything felt messy. I thought, there has to be a simpler way. So I started working on a small online platform, something clean, easy to use, something that could actually help. I didn't have a team. I didn't have investors. I barely had time. But I had determination, and that was enough to begin. Every night after my cafe shift, I would come home, make a cup of cheap coffee, and sit at my desk. Sometimes it was midnight. Sometimes later. I taught myself what I didn't know. I made mistakes, fixed them, and tried again. The process was slow and often frustrating. There were nights when nothing worked, when I felt like giving up and just sleeping instead. But I didn't. Weeks turned into months, and months into years. I slowly started to see progress. The platform began to take shape. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. I shared it online, quietly at first. A few people tried it, then a few more. Slowly, it began to grow. During this time, I heard updates from home. Adrian was still living comfortably. My parents paid his rent, his bills, and even his trips. I remember one phone call where my mother casually mentioned that he had spent $5,000 on a weekend getaway. She laughed as she said it, like it was something normal. I didn't respond. I just listened. Because my life was nothing like that. Every dollar I spent had a reason. Every choice I made had a purpose. I wasn't building comfort. I was building something real. There were times I felt alone, deeply alone. No family to support me, no one to celebrate small wins with, no one to tell me I was doing okay. But over time, I realized something important. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need anyone to tell me I was enough. I was proving it to myself, one long day at a time. My small apartment, once a place of struggle, slowly became something else. It became my office, my classroom, my safe place. It held every late night, every failure, every small success. It witnessed the version of me that refused to give up. And without even noticing it at first, I began to change. I was no longer the quiet girl sitting across the table, waiting to be judged. I was someone building her own path, step by step, dollar by dollar. The fear that once held me back started to fade, replaced by something stronger, confidence. Not loud confidence, not the kind Adrian had. Mine was quiet, steady, and earned. By the time a few years had passed, my platform was no longer just an idea. It was real. People were using it. They were relying on it. And for the first time in my life, I felt something I had never truly felt before. Control. I didn't know exactly where it would lead. I didn't know how big it could become. But I knew one thing for certain. I had built it myself, from nothing. And no one could take that away from me. By the time 5 years had passed in America, I had almost forgotten what it felt like to wait for approval. My days were still long, but they were different now. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something that had a life of its own. The small idea I once worked on in the corner of my tiny apartment had grown into a real company. People were using my platform every day, not because they knew me, but because it helped them. That mattered more than anything. At first, growth came slowly. A few users turned into a few hundred, then a few thousand. I answered emails myself, fixed problems myself, and made every decision carefully. I still lived simply, even when I started earning more. I didn't trust success yet. I had spent too long fighting for every dollar to suddenly relax. Then things started moving faster. One morning, I woke up to an email from a company I had heard of but never imagined would notice me. They wanted to talk. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I read the message 3 times, just to be sure it was real. They were interested in my platform, how it worked, how it was growing, and what I planned to do next. That call led to another, and then another. Soon, I found myself in meetings I never thought I would be part of. People asked questions about my ideas, my plans, my future. For the first time in my life, I wasn't being compared to someone else. I was being listened to. Still, I stayed careful. I remembered where I came from. I remembered how quickly things could fall apart. So I didn't rush into anything. But then came the offer. It arrived on a quiet afternoon, just like any other. I was sitting at my desk, the same one I had used for years, when I opened the email. The number didn't make sense at first. It felt too big, too distant from the life I had known. $72 million. I stared at it for a long time, waiting for the feeling to hit me. Excitement, shock, joy, something. But instead, there was silence. Not the empty kind, but the kind that comes when something deep inside you shifts. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the city. Cars moved, people walked, life continued like nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. I thought about the nights I couldn't sleep because I was too worried about rent. The days I skipped meals to save money. The moments I almost gave up but didn't. And suddenly, the number made sense. It wasn't just money. It was every hour, every sacrifice, every quiet decision to keep going. The process of finalizing the deal took time. There were lawyers, documents, meetings that lasted for hours. It was exhausting in a different way, but I handled it the same way I had handled everything else, step by step, without letting fear take over. The day it was done didn't feel dramatic. There was no big celebration, no loud moment. I simply closed my laptop and sat still. I had built something from nothing, and someone believed it was worth $72 million. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to rest. A few weeks later, I made a decision I had been avoiding. I booked a ticket back to Europe. It cost more than my first one, around $2,000, but this time, the price didn't matter. I told myself it was just a visit. Just Christmas. Nothing more. When I arrived, everything looked the same. The streets, the cold air, even the way the sky seemed heavier than in America. And then there was the house. The gray stone walls hadn't changed. The garden still struggled. The wooden gate still creaked when I pushed it open. For a moment, I stood there, holding my suitcase, feeling like two versions of myself were meeting at once, the girl who left and the person who returned. Inside, the house felt smaller than I remembered. My mother, Elena, greeted me with a soft smile, like she wasn't sure how to act. My father, Daniel, gave a short nod. Adrian was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone, just like always. He glanced up briefly, then looked back down. "Hey," he said, without much interest. I nodded. "Hey." Nothing had changed. Dinner that night was quiet at first. The table was the same. The seats were the same. Even the tension felt familiar. My father asked a few simple questions about my life in America, but he didn't seem too interested in the answers. My mother tried to keep the conversation going, asking about my work, my apartment, my daily routine. Adrian barely spoke. When he did, it was about himself, his plans, his ideas, the things he wanted to do but hadn't started yet. I listened more than I spoke. It felt easier that way. At some point, my mother turned to me and asked, "So, how is your little project going?" I paused for a second. Little project. I almost smiled. "It's not little anymore," I said calmly. That got their attention. My father looked up. Adrian finally put his phone down. "What do you mean?" he asked. I picked up my glass, took a small sip, and then said it as simply as I could. "I sold it." The room went quiet. "For how much?" my mother asked, her voice careful. I set the glass down and looked at them. $72 million. For a second, no one moved. Then Adrian coughed suddenly, choking on his drink. My father's eyes widened, and my mother covered her mouth in shock. And just like that, everything changed. The moment the number left my mouth, $72 million, the room stopped feeling like a place I knew. It was the same table, the same chairs, the same people, but something had shifted. The silence didn't feel neutral anymore. It felt heavy, like something was about to break. Adrian was the first to react. He coughed again, still recovering, his face turning red as he grabbed his glass. "That's not funny," he said, though his voice didn't sound certain. He was searching my face, trying to find a sign that I was joking. "I'm not joking," I said calmly. My mother, Elena, leaned forward slightly, her eyes wide. "Sophia, are you serious?" "Yes." Another silence followed, but this one didn't last long. Adrian sat up straighter, his expression changing quickly. The shock faded, replaced by something sharper, something calculating. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, that's amazing. I mean, we're family. This is huge for all of us." I didn't respond right away. I just watched him. Then he said it. "You should help me out," he added casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I mean, you don't need all that money. You can give me half." For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. "Half?" I repeated, my voice steady. "Yeah," he said, leaning back like the decision was already made.
It's only fair.
We grew up together. We're brother and sister. Before I could answer, my father, Daniel, suddenly slammed his hand on the table.
The sound echoed through the room. "He's right," he said loudly.
You owe him everything.
I turned my head slowly to look at him.
Excuse me.
You heard me, he continued, his voice rising.
You leave this family, go to America, make all this money, and now you come back like you did it all alone? You think you're better than us?
I felt something cold settle inside me. I did do it alone, I said quietly.
My mother tried to interrupt, her voice softer, almost pleading. Sophia, we're just saying, family supports each other. Adrian has always had big dreams. Maybe this is your chance to help him succeed too. I let out a small breath, not quite a laugh.
Has he? I asked.
Or has he just had everything given to him? Adrian's face tightened. What's that supposed to mean? It means, I said, turning to him fully, that I worked for what I have.
Every dollar, every step. No one gave me anything. That's not true, my father snapped. We raised you.
We gave you a home. Yes, I said, nodding slowly. You gave me a home. And you gave him everything else.
The room grew tense again.
I could feel years of silence rising to the surface, pushing against my chest. All the moments I stayed quiet, all the times I accepted things as they were right there, waiting to be spoken. I watched you buy him a car for $25,000 without a second thought, I continued. I watched you pay his rent, his bills, his trips. I watched him spend $5,000 on a weekend like it was nothing. And when I needed anything, I was told to work for it.
My mother looked down at her hands. That's not the same, she said softly. It is to me, I replied.
Adrian shook his head, clearly angry now.
So what? You're just going to sit there with all that money and not help your own family? That's selfish.
I held his gaze. Maybe it is, I said. Or maybe it's the first time I'm not being used.
That hit harder than I expected.
The room went completely still. My father stood up slightly, his face red with anger.
You don't talk like that in this house.
I looked around the room. The same walls, the same table, the same people who never really saw me. I don't belong to this house anymore, I said calmly.
No one spoke.
I didn't come back to argue, I continued. I came because I thought maybe something had changed.
But it hasn't. I pushed my chair back and stood up.
My mother finally looked up at me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't fully read. Sophia, don't leave like this. I paused for a moment, just long enough to feel the weight of everything. I didn't leave like this, I said gently. I left quietly. This time, I'm just being honest. Adrian scoffed, crossing his arms. You'll regret this.
I shook my head. No, I said. I've already lived with regret. I'm not going back to that.
I walked toward the door, each step feeling lighter than the last.
No one followed me. No one stopped me.
When I opened the wooden gate, it made the same old creaking sound. But this time, it didn't feel like something holding me back.
It felt like something finally letting me go.
Outside, the air was cold, but it was clear. I took a deep breath and looked ahead, not behind.
For the first time, I wasn't walking away because I had to. I was walking away because I chose to.
And that made all the difference.